All right. Hello, my name is Eric Ford. Today I'd like to talk about leading from your strengths, managing one's self-care. So what is self-care? This is the act of taking care of your own mental, physical, emotional, and I'm going to add one more to this, spiritual well-being. And it's absolutely essential if we're going to help others that we first help ourselves. If you can't swim, diving into the water to help a drowning person is probably not your best answer. I recommend a little bit of selfishness in one's life, and that is tending to one's own needs. You're really no good to anybody if you can't help yourself on some ways. So what is the importance of this? Well, the first thing is if you do it well, you'll reduce the amount of stress that you both perceive and experience, and it will enhance your quality of life overall. In addition, there is a huge volume of research and a growing body of research that shows keeping yourself healthy and mentally well is actually life extending and reduces the amount of illness later in life. And we'll give you a few tips on how to manage the daily ins and outs of stress and lead a better life. So again, there's sort of two paths, and again, we choose these paths ourselves. One way, and it's pointing down, I should probably flip this slide around some, is where we engage in good self-care and we experience satisfaction in life. And over time, we build up resilience, and resilience is our ability to withstand sudden unexpected shocks to our system. On the other hand, if we engage in a lot of self-sacrifice, and that's how we justify a lot of what we do, you'll often hear people say, I'm working long hours for you. I'm doing the things that nobody else will do to make the organization or my personal life better. And to that end, I'm engaging in for self-care. I'm skipping meals. I didn't work out. I didn't do the things I needed to. And as a result, I'm always fatigued or tired. I'm starting to experience burnout, and burnout's a big topic, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And it's often caused by the workplace. In other words, we're the victims of burnout. And I hate to use the word victim very often, but we really are the victims of working in an environment where people are causing moral injury. And the moral injury that they're inflicting upon us manifests itself in ourselves as burnout and dissatisfaction. And we tend to leave our jobs or our relationships or our communities when we start to experience those levels of dissatisfaction. So what does burnout look like? And burnout is sort of the last symptom. This is when you really see the bad health effects. People become disengaged and withdrawn in both their work and personal life. And again, it's often the result of chronic self-neglect and self-sacrifice. We often view self-sacrifice as being a good thing. It is up to a point and at the right times, but it isn't always. And you start to lose your passion, your vision and purpose. The things that you used to enjoy no longer bring you happiness. So what are some of the causes of burnout? Well, excessive workloads or highly varied workloads where we never feel like we're actually completing a task. Work where we don't have any control or autonomy in how the work is carried out. Failures to maintain boundaries with others. We see a lot of people are pushing their personal problems into our lives. And this happens both in a systematic as well as individual way. The classic example of a systematic failure of boundaries is we'll often see our younger single colleagues will be asked, hey, why don't you work the Friday night shift? It's not like you have a wife and kids to go work with. And therefore, these younger people are having their lives intruded upon simply because they happen to be younger or single or some other feature. A more internalized problem is perfectionism. And this is really something about when does a project need to be just good enough versus when does it truly need to be perfect. And the last thing is poor self-care. And this really manifests itself. First off, you'll notice it in your sleep, generally speaking. You won't sleep through the night. You won't get enough sleep. You'll find thoughts intruding into your sleep. So when do you need help? And oh, by the way, you need help before you need help. What do I mean by that? Well, in both your personal and probably interpersonal lives, it is good to start seeing counselors before you're there in crisis. So if you're married or in a relationship and you're starting to argue and you need help navigating the topics, learning to fight fair, and those sorts of things, it's very hard to show up at the counselor with day one being about fighting. It's much better to go and see a counselor when things are going well. Okay, what's making you happy? What's going right? What did the other person do that made you happy? And that way you're giving the counselor a fighting chance to actually be able to say, when you do have a fight, do you remember the occasions when you were happy and the things that you said or did that made yourself happy or the other person? Therefore, I'm a strong advocate of getting into counseling, establishing that relationship. And I'm not saying going to spend an hour a week on the couch, pouring out your soul starting tomorrow. No, I'm just saying build a relationship with a counselor, set out some personal goals, talk about the things that are making you happy. You can go once a month or once every other month. And by the way, your health insurance pays for this. You shouldn't be having to pay for these sorts of things. And if you're an employee of a university or some other place, often it's free through those outlets. Again, universities have student counseling centers. And again, those are often part of your tuition and fees. Take advantage of them. Burnout, as I mentioned earlier, is what we experience as the worker, the recipient of stress. Moral injury is what we are essentially doling out to others when we make other people's lives stressful by not getting our deliverables to them, by overloading them. And I'll go on about this when I talk about our Managing Others lecture at some length, about how to know when you're engaging in moral injury and what you can do to stop that behavior and help your employees lead more productive and happier lives in the workplace. So there's sort of 5 classic pillars. And the first is just absolutely amazing how simple it is. Drinking more water and eating well. And we live in a world that by and large is conspiring to keep us from doing these 2 things. We don't have good, healthy food sources readily available out in public places. If you think about fast food, it tends to be both high carb and high energy with relatively modest or little to no nutritional value, if we're speaking honestly. Therefore, managing your own food intake is very important. Again, getting enough good sleep. If you wear one of these, I'm wearing a Fitbit, but if you have a Garmin or some other form of smartwatch, many of them have sleep monitors on them. And if you're doing one of the assignments based on your key performance indicators, one thing you can do is simply track your sleep for a week or 2 and see where you are in that and think about how you may want to change your sleep practices. And there's some very simple things. Many people, when their feet get cold, don't sleep well. And I know sleeping in socks is not exactly the sexiest thing that has ever happened, but it might be something you want to consider, at least to start the evening so that you have a fighting chance. Being active. This is something I generally say it needs to be scheduled, and you'll notice that's the next bullet point as well, is really scheduling a time for your personal wellness. This is something, if you're smart about this, especially if, like, again, I work on a university campus, there's nothing stopping me from going in the middle of the day over to the student rec center or some other place and getting my exercise in. And as far as my boss knows, I'm in a meeting. So I look good because I'm at work and I might as well go get some exercise. It also breaks up the monotony of my day, makes my day less stressful. Worst comes to worst, I can hit the bag a few times and off we go. And the last thing is asking for help. As again, I mentioned, it's an awfully good idea to get counseling and other sorts of services prior to actually needing them. So when you have to ask, it's not a huge hurdle that you're trying to clear. Again, I can't emphasize enough. This is something in the United States has become an endemic problem of people simply not getting the right amount of sleep. You need to probably get 8 hours, although not always in a row, by the way. This is something where no one's self. Throughout most of human history, people got up after about 4 or 5 hours sleep, did some activities for 30 minutes to an hour, and then went back to sleep. Why were they doing that? Well, they were doing things like tending fires that kept the wolves and bears at bay, or just keeping the fire burning, because before we had matches and lighters and other things, getting the fire started was no small feat. They also just, for some reason, got up. And so it depends on you. Figure out what works for you. The other thing is the devices. My wife will look at this, the last thing before she goes to sleep every night. And I'm like, honey, you just delayed your going to sleep by 15 to 30 minutes, because the quality of the light that comes off of these machines when it hits the rods and cones in the back of our eyes actually signals to the rest of our body, oh, you're not ready to go to sleep yet. And so you need to really set that device aside, and you can put settings on it. Mine won't ring after 8 p.m., for example, or before 5 a.m., unless it's a few certain people. So those things need to happen. Again, I'm not going to go on about this. You know that exercising is good for you. The one thing I will say for you is, if you miss a day, don't beat yourself up about it. Tomorrow's another day, and it's a great first day to start a new streak. Get out there, do it. Don't beat yourself up about it. Again, routine, routine, routine. And I don't mean you have to become so regimented that nothing ever changes, but I do think a few key activities you want to dedicate the same time to every day or every week. So what do you do when you experience that you're stressed and you know it? You can feel your jaw clenching, your fist clenching, the back is wound up, your eyes are squinting. There are a few things, and I put on a few on this little board. Give someone else a compliment. You'd be surprised how stress relieving that is. Write it down. Write something good down. The other thing I do, I actually carry wooden nickels from this place called a Silver Spoon Creamery. And whenever I catch a staff member or somebody else in my place of work doing something right, I give them one of these wooden nickels that's worth a free scoop of ice cream over at this ice cream shop in Avondale. And they love it. You'd have thought I'd given them the winning lottery ticket, because they're so happy, and they'll tell you how much they love it. So a few things to do. You really ought to, every so often, give yourself a self-care weekend. And this involves a lot of forms of stimulation. Go to a different part of town than you normally go to. Go to stores that you don't normally go to. Some of these vintage or salvage places are awfully fun. Splurge on something you don't normally splurge on. Every couple of years, I'll go get a shave from a barber all the way down with the razor, and it's a really unusual experience for a man. If you've never had a straight edge shave, it's worth it. It's not cheap, takes some time, but it feels really good, and you'll want them more often than you should after that. Read a book. I don't know when we forgot how to do that. And also things like volunteering. You'd be surprised how much working for others actually makes a difference. So one of the things we've been talking about with more and more frequency in the public health space and other parts of healthcare is the importance of other people. And this became something we were acutely aware of during the COVID pandemic, when people were isolating, and many people became very lonely, very depressed, and our suicide rates, domestic abuse, and many other negative impacts really rose to levels that were shocking and unacceptable in many ways. And it really pointed to the importance of other people. And by this, I mean connectedness. Most of us can have about 5 to 7 really good friends. And what do I mean by really good friends? These are people you will pick up the phone, dial the number, and have reasonable certainty that when they see your number pop up, they will answer it. The old joke used to be, these are the people who will bail you out of jail if you need to. people you want to see, the people you meet routinely for coffee, the people you confide in and know that that confidence will be kept. So that's what connectedness is. And like I said, most of us have 5 to 7 people that are sort of in our inner circle. I'll show you some circles in just a minute. So we talk about togetherness versus separateness. I'm an introvert, to be honest, and I don't mind long periods of being alone, and I'm often happy in those long periods of being alone. However, after a while, I will start to have things where doubts and other things start to creep into my thinking. And at that point, I've probably been alone too long, and it's important to seek out others. So good forms of being alone is independence and mindful solitude. Good forms of togetherness are interdependence. People I know I can rely upon, but not people that I need in a codependent or possessive fashion. Right? So this box here in the middle of this screen is what we're striving for. So the goal is to be both social and independent. We all need time apart. And by the way, I would schedule this as well. Feeling comfortable on your own probably directly relates to knowing we can easily reconnect with others. So I also have friends that I see irregularly that I was once very close with, people I went to college with, was in the fraternity with, I was in the United States military, people I served with. And oftentimes I can go a year or even more before I see them again. And the conversation more or less picks up where we left off. And it's that ability to reconnect with people over time. And you may find out throughout your life cycle that you'll be in the same phase with some people having children, getting married, other big life events. And it's easier to connect when you're in that same phase of life. So the goal is to think about your interconnectedness. And I've put down a list of a few questions here that you might want to write down and ask yourself. And as again, I always make the slides available. And one question is, how connected are you? Do you have those 5 to 7 friends that you can rattle off in good order? What do you do to get connected to people? What is it that you do to outreach and make friends with people? And how does that look? Who listens to you when you need to talk to someone? Having that person who will simply listen without providing solutions or criticism is absolutely critical. And oh, by the way, if you want to be a good friend, you too need to be able to listen and not provide solutions or criticism. In fact, often what the best thing to do is, it's sort of a Jungian form of therapy. Simply repeat back what you've heard to them to make sure you've got clarity about what the issue is. And when they hear what they've just said repeated back to them, they often are not cognizant on some level of what their real issue was until they heard it repeated back, even in their own words. Think about who you first call when you get good news. Who do you call when you get bad news? Again, list these people out. It's a good exercise to map your network and a good exercise to keep track of how much you talk to them. And they actually make apps for this sort of thing. So here's a couple ways to map these things. The innermost circle might be your most intimate, and we can talk about physical intimacy, monogamy or polygamy or polyamorous, whatever sort of relationship you're seeking, but that physical component might be one form of intimacy that's at your inner circle, and family and friends often come in there. Then there's the people you're friendly with, and they tend to be dependable. There are many people that we have as mere acquaintances. And then again, these other people that are in our possibility zones. So here I've provided a little bullseye with a happy face. You might want to go off and think about this. And I've also divided it on the left-hand side, people who are actually family and friends that are outside of your workplace. And on the right-hand side, your service, workplace, and community groups. So a few things, once you get that diagram mocked up, think about it for a little bit. Are there people you lean on too much? Should you be building relationships so you can lean on others and have more than one way of outletting if you need it. What specific steps can you take to expand your support network? This last one's a touchy topic, and I know many people shy away from it, but I want to talk about spirituality, religiosity, and well-being. And spirituality and religiosity are not the same thing. Many people will tell you, I never go to church, but I'm a very spiritual person. And in fact, religiosity is to some extent the amount you engage in formal classical religious practices. If I go to church every Sunday, that's a measure of my religiosity. It may also be an indicator of my spirituality, but not necessarily. I may sit at home for an hour every Sunday and simply meditate or ponder things and be very spiritual in my own right without being deeply religious. And I will mention that both elements are actually important, and you probably want to engage in both elements. Even if you're a hardcore atheist, it's worth being engaged in a community where we're talking about bigger issues, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. A few years ago, an NIH psychiatrist named David Larson wrote a book, God, the Evidence. And here's a fairly famous quote from this. If a new health treatment was discovered that helped to reduce the rate of teenage suicide, prevent drug and alcohol abuse, improve the treatment for depression, reduce recovery from surgery times, lower divorce rates, improve well-being, what would one think every physician in the country would be scrambling to try? In other words, if you could find something that did all of those things, wouldn't you be prescribing it regularly? And the fact of the matter is, it's really spirituality and religiosity. By the way, I should mention, I borrowed this slide from a Veterans Administration presentation. And when the VA is talking about this, it's a big thing. And spiritual and soul is a form of growing and connecting and gives you a way to talk to other people. So again, religion is a body of shared beliefs and also tends to come with a lot of rituals attached to it. Spirituality is directly experiencing the sacred. And again, you don't necessarily need other people engaged with you. Many people find this spirituality in nature, needless to say. And the examination of what is our soul, what makes something alive. And you can be all of these things simultaneously, separately, and at different levels at different times. So we know, and there's just more and more healthcare evidence and truly clinical studies, that faith and spiritual practice decrease all of these negative behaviors: alcohol abuse, depression, decreased divorce, increased marital and sexual satisfaction, increase in overall happiness and well-being. In fact, I will say this to the men in the audience in particular, it is absolutely critical that male members of the family attend church with the family. I'll just relate my own personal experience as a child. When my mother would take my sister and I to church, we enjoyed going to church for many years. After a while, we sort of entered our early adolescence and didn't really want to go. And we sort of were in the, we'll go kicking and screaming. And for a while, my mother was big enough that she could drag us kicking and screaming, and away we went. And eventually, though, it all kind of came apart when she couldn't drag us anymore. And of course, our answer to her was, Dad doesn't have to go. Why should we? And it was not a good way to be. And they really have, if we were to dig down into these studies, in families where the men attend church along with the rest of the family, abuse, violence, divorce, all decline. Bad behaviors in the children also decline. Absenteeism from school, substance abuse, on and on and on. So there's really something to it. And I'm not saying any church in particular, pick your brand and go. I don't care. Don't join a cult or anything, but it really does make a difference. So, as I've talked about throughout this class, I want to make one small change each and every round, and hopefully change all of our lives for the better. And we want to help you clarify your beliefs and your values, figure out how you can enter into these sorts of practices and other things you can do. There's many small things you can do. Carry a photo of someone that's important to you and look over it occasionally. Classically, again, men used to carry pictures of their family in their billfold. Read something inspirational. One of my favorite books, which isn't really about religion, is called The Life of Pi. It's also a very good movie, but the book is short. I mean, you can read this in a weekend, and it's, it's something you can do very easily. Offer gratitude. As I mentioned, I give the wooden nickels, simply thanking people for what they've done, or do some random act of kindness just every day. Again, I was a Boy Scout growing up, and the joke was helping the little ladies cross the street, but doing those sorts of things. Just holding the door. The other day I was at the grocery store and somebody finished loading their car, and I simply offered to take the cart off their hands. I was going into the grocery store anyway. It was really nothing to me, but it saved them the trouble of having to take the cart all the way back to the front or to one of those bins off the side. It was sort of appreciated. Have a nice day sort of stuff. All right. There are, again, I like to provide you with tools when I can. There's a lot of apps out there. There's something called Headspace that's sort of a meditation tool. I actually used to have this as a class exercise. We're asking students to use Headspace for 5 minutes a day. And it worked really well. I probably shouldn't have stopped, but it was a very good one. Something that manages your sleep cycle, Plant Nanny, there's a bunch of them. If you'll send me your favorites, if you have something you really like, I'll be sure to give it a shout out in later editions. With that said, I'll stop there and ask if anyone has any questions.